Ever felt completely lost when trying to figure out which cable or connector to use for your network setup? Whether it's RJ45, USB, or fiber optics, choosing the wrong one can cost you time, money, and a whole lot of frustration. But what if I told you there's a way to master all the essential network cables and connectors in just minutes? In this video, I'll break down everything you need to know from the basics to the advanced, so you'll never second guess your setup again. Ready to become a networking pro? Let's dive in. Network cables and connectors. In this course, we're going to look at different types of connectors in the world of computing. To begin with, here is an RJ11 type connector. The letters RJ literally stand for registered jack. The RJ11 is a connector that is mainly found with 4 wires. It is widely used to connect telephone equipment. For example, you must have already seen it on your internet box. This is what allows you to connect the box to your telephone line if you are on ADSL. In the network, this type of connector is used to connect your PC to a modem. This allows the PC to be connected to the network. Connectors of this type can be locked by its small plastic tab. The RJ11 is much smaller than the RJ45, which is much more common. The RJ45 is by far the most common network connector. This is an 8-wire connector used to connect computers to local networks. And like the RJ11, which looks very similar, it also locks into place with a small plastic tab. Let's say that the RJ45 is the big brother of the RJ11. Let's move on to the BNC connector, which is mainly used for analog and digital video transmissions, as well as audio. BNC stand for Bayonet Nil Consolman. This type of BNC connector is fitted to a coaxial cable. This gives a connector called F-type. It is a threaded connector, which is used on coaxial cables. Let's move on to the IEEE 1494 connector, also known as the Firewire cable. Recognized by its D shape, it's a type of connection that's becoming less and less popular. It's mainly used to connect video equipment such as the old mini DV cameras, very rarely for the network. Then there is the very well-known connector, which is the USB. USB stand for Universal Serial Bus. USB is very common on desktop and laptop computers. Almost any type of peripheral device can be connected to a computer using the USB connector. So, there are several types of USB connectors. There is Type A, Type B, Mini USB, and Micro USB. There is also the Thunderbolt format, which was launched in 2011 and which was initially reserved for the Apple universe. Today, it is frequently found for PCs and is available in 3 different versions. Versions 1 and 2 use the same connector as the DisplayPort. And version 3 uses a USB Type-C connector. We are now going to talk about the connector which is called RCA. RCA stand for Radio Corporation of America. The RCA is a very old connector, which arrived in the 40s. It is mainly used to carry video and audio signals. This type of connector is very often used in groups of 3: a yellow, a white, and a red. White and red are used for audio and yellow for video. Optical fiber. Let's move on to optic fiber type connectors. LC, lucent connector. We start with the LC type, lucent connector, which is a local connector, similar a bit to the RJ45, and which connects mainly between floors of a building. Another type of fiber optic connector is the ST, straight tip. This uses a kind of bayonet lock and is commonly used with a single-mode fiber optic cable. For the moment, there is no need to know the exact definition of the different modes of optical fiber. But basically, in the single-mode SM fiber, the core is so small that the light will flow straight ahead, whereas in a multi-mode fiber, it will bounce off the walls. And the last fiber optic connector, which we will see, is the SC standard connector type, which, as its name suggests, is a standard connector. To connect it, you just have to push it, a bit like the RCA audio and video plugs. The SC fiber optic connector is also widely used between floors of a building. We are now going to talk about a technical term, plenum. Some questions on the CompTIA exam are about this name. The plenum type cable is an electrical cable that is laid in particular areas of buildings. In the USA, the plastics used in the construction of plenum cables are regulated by a standard for the installation of air conditioning and ventilation systems. The term plenum refers to a space in a building where there is free air circulation, and this is generally located between the suspended ceiling and the structural ceiling. Plenumless buildings have ducts that encapsulate the airflow. Plenum buildings, on the other hand, have an airflow that circulates in the false ceiling and are therefore more prone to fire than non-plenum buildings. For this reason, cables running through false ceilings containing airflow must meet certain requirements. The American standard NFPA 90A allows them to be more resistant to fire and does not produce any toxic fumes if burned. Powerline. We will now talk about carrier current, which allows us to create a network using the electrical system of the house or building. In some cases, whether at home or at the office, the room where you are located may not be equipped with a wired or Wi-Fi network. Well, in this case, the ideal is to use the Powerline technology of Powerline. For example, suppose you need a computer to be able to access the internet, but in the room where you are, there is no Wi-Fi and no Ethernet router. In this case, the ideal is to use Ethernet on the power grid. To do this, we will need two Powerline adapters. One that will be plugged into next to the internet router, and one who will be in the room not having access to the network. These Powerline adapters plug directly into a power outlet, and they have a built-in Ethernet port to accommodate an RJ45 connector. In this way, the Ethernet data will use the electrical wiring of the building or house to provide network so that the laptop can access the internet. The HDMI cable is also an Ethernet standard. Version 1.4 of HDMI has the ability to send and receive data at 100 megabits per second. This means that in addition to video and audio on the same cable, HDMI has the ability to network Ethernet. Wiring standards. We're going to end the course by looking at the wiring standards. The terms 568A and 568B define the rules for how twisted pair cables should be wired to RJ45 connectors. Standard 568A. The 568A standard is wired in this order: 1. White-green, 2. Green, 3. White-orange, 4. Blue, 5. White-blue, 6. Orange, 7. White-brown, 8. and brown. 568B standards. And the 568B standard is wired like this: 1. White-orange, 2. Orange, 3. White-green, 4. Blue, 5. White-blue, 6. Green, 7. White-brown, 8. and brown. There is no difference in functionality between these two standards. Straight cable. If both ends of the cable are wired using the same standard, then this is called a straight cable. For example, the top cable is wired at both ends using the 568A standard, and the bottom one uses the 568B standard. The straight-through cable allows signals to pass directly from one end to the other. This is the most common type of cable and is used to connect equipment of different layers. That is, from computers to switches, or switches to routers. So, the notion of network layer is more part of the CCNA program, or the CompTIA Network Plus certification. Crossover cable. Now let's move on to the other type of cable, which is the crossover cable. It is said to be a crossover cable when the two ends use a different standard. For example, one end is wired with standard A and the other is wired with B. Crossover cables are used to connect two devices of the same layer, i.e., two similar devices. For example, you can use a crossover cable to connect two computers directly to each other without using a switch. Or you can also connect two switches together and also two routers. A fairly simple technique to recognize the type of cable is to look at the order of the colored wires inside the RJ45 connector. If the order of the wires is the same at both ends, then you have a straight cable. And if it doesn't, it's probably a crossover cable or a badly connected cable, rollover cable. The last type of cable that we are going to see is the rollover cable. It is used to connect a computer to a console port on a router or switch. Here, the two ends are wired completely opposite. If you hold the two ends of a rollover cable, one against the other, all the wires match. Loopback cable. And we're going to end the course with the loopback cable, which is used to do tests. It's simply a cable which will make the computer think it's connected to a network. To create a loopback cable, simply shunt pins 1 and 3, as well as pins 2 and 6.